Welcome to the Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor. Now, here's your host, Tom Lindquist.
Glad to have you back in the Leadership Lyceum, where we bring you direct access to top CEOs and directors of boards in an interview format that provides insight on situational issues that confront CEOs every day. It is a CEO's virtual mentor. Welcome to episode 9. I had the pleasure of visiting Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International, in his Los Angeles office for this conversation as part of what will be a bit of a sub-series introducing some of the recently appointed CEOs in the utility industry. Edison International is the publicly traded holding company for regulated utilities Southern California Edison and a small array of non-regulated investments, plus Edison Energy. At $11.5 billion in annual revenue and serving 15 million customers, the company is one of the largest utilities in the country. We'll be right back to kick off the interview. Stay tuned. Consistent with our typical interview format, we kick off with a discussion about the key strategic imperatives for the company. Our interview will delve deeply into one of Pedro's priorities for positioning their utility, Southern California Edison, or SCE, to help the state of California achieve its very ambitious, legislatively mandated targets for reducing greenhouse gases by 2030. Just a short 13 years away. The path ahead for Pedro and Edison with respect to his plan to, quote, help catalyze all the efforts to support reducing greenhouse gases, unquote, is uncharted and unprecedented. To achieve the targets, it's not enough for California to decarbonize the electric power sector. They need cooperation and electrification from other sectors. As fitting context for this interview, in our last podcast episode 8, we illustrated through our interview with Susan Story, CEO of American Water, how success in the public utility industry requires industry leaders to lead beyond their authority, that is, leading beyond the boundaries of their corporations. We discussed that continuously achieving safe, clean, reliable, affordable service is dependent upon public policy, legislation, and regulatory relationships, which in turn require leaders to lead and influence beyond the boundaries of their corporations. California legislation presents a stage set for leadership of this nature. This includes a plot thickened by stark disparity between California and federal climate and renewable energy policy. Let's go to the interview. Thank you for hosting me.
Oh, my pleasure. Pedro. Thanks, Tom.
Pedro, you're 3.5 months into your tenure as CEO. What are the key areas of focus on your leadership agenda at this early stage in these early days?
Well, some days it feels early and some days it doesn't. One big part of the early part of the process was just managing through the transition, which I thought was well done by our board, and Ted Craver, who was my predecessor. So our team has really gelled in these first few months. I think in terms of strategy for us, there are 4 big focus areas. 3 for a regulated utility and 1 for competitive businesses. Inside a regulated utility, there are 3 things that we're doing. One is to continue our reinvestment in our grid. That's the core business, and it's a grid that's aging and a grid that also needs modernizing to support the new resources we're seeing arriving in California. So reinvesting in that grid is point 1. Point 2 is continuing to improve our operational performance. It starts with the safety of our employees and our public, but it continues on with how we do in terms of reliability and customer satisfaction and the costs that drive affordability. Then the third big part of SCE strategy is how we position the company to help our state of California achieve its very ambitious targets that are now codified in law for reducing greenhouse gases. It's a big task of 40% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030. And even with the change in administration at the federal level, the state of California remains very committed to this. So we have a role to play, both directly through our grid, and I also think indirectly as a member of this society in California to help catalyze all the efforts to support reducing greenhouse gases. Outside of our utility, the 4th strategic element is pursuing different avenues, not only for growth, but for playing in and understanding the drastic transformation that's taking place in our industry. The largest effort we have right now is developing Edison Energy, which is offering a suite of services, really energy as a service, focused on large commercial and industrial customers across the country. It's a segment that has complex energy needs, but also tends to be one of the first adopters of new technologies as they come into the industry. I'd say those four, from a strategy perspective, have really been my main focus areas.
Let's take a quick break. We'll be right back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. We're back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International.
More recently, at the end of 2015, we acquired 3 companies that form the core for our Edison Energy suite of services. And these also are focused on the C&I market. We acquired Altenex. They're based in Boston, and they have really helped create the market connecting C&I customers with off-site renewables. So they process more than a gigawatt worth of PPAs today. Second company we acquired at that time was Delta Energy. They're based in Ohio, and they do over $5 billion a year in commodity procurement as the agent for our customers. So they're not taking that on our balance sheet, but they're assisting C&I customers with their own commodity procurement. And the third firm we purchased was Interactive. They're based in New Jersey, and they're really an engineering shop. They help customers across a broad range of needs, building controls and efficiency projects and boiler work, and really quite versatile team there that can get into C&I customers' premises and really help them with a broad suite of engineering-based services. Tom, we've learned a lot in less than a year.
The learning that comes from those investments,
Absolutely.
How is that helping with
even before the regulator side, just in terms of Edison Energy itself, the learnings of being in the market and actually testing the concept with clients and seeing what makes sense for them, just giving us new data that we are using to refine our business plan. And I've shared with our investors that we expect to be providing more detail over the course of 2017, certainly by the fall of 2017, if not earlier. We'll provide more details in terms of what are the metrics and milestones that we want to measure ourselves by, so we can give them a greater degree of comfort around our confidence in the business, but also what are the measures of success that we and they can hold us accountable for. But I think your question was broader in terms of the learnings, right? Obviously, in California, we have affiliate restrictions that are probably more restrictive than those in most states, putting up some pretty stiff walls between what we can do in the regulated utility side versus what we can do on the competitive side. That said, one of the value propositions from a total EIX perspective of having a dual platform is that the utility gives us one lens into how the industry is changing. How are utility customers adopting new technologies? How is that influencing the use of the grid? What changes does that drive in how the grid is configured? It's one lens. It's a very different lens that we now get by serving customers at Edison Energy and at SoCore, and seeing how those C&I customers are adopting these new technologies, how they're interacting with their local regulated utilities. I think we'll be smarter about where the industry is headed and have a more sensitive radar screen that allows us a view into how real customers are changing their real relationship with energy out there by having one eye, one vision or view through a regulated lens and a very different view through a competitive lens.
I'm not trying to encroach on the wall that's between, but to the extent that you can give an example of something that's appealing to customers or serving customers differently.
I'll throw one example out, use of storage. I'm really proud of what SCE has been doing really for years now to try and get our collective heads around what's the potential for storage, how might the different kinds of technology fit into a grid like ours, what are the different use cases, etc. Recent lessons from that, for example, when Southern California Gas had its issues with the Aliso Canyon storage field, last year PUC asked the utilities to run solicitations to see if additional storage could be brought online, electric storage, to help compensate for the loss of gas storage. That brought out some very different use cases and frankly a lot of creativity on the part of both third parties in the market and our utility team. And so that's one way we learned about different ways to use storage. And a couple examples, we now have added batteries at a couple of our utility-owned peaking stations. I think it's the first time that you've seen that integration of storage down at the peaker level. So very different use case. At the same time as SCE has been running broader solicitations for storage, and a lot of that has led to battery contracts, a few non-battery applications as well, but lots of batteries. Behind the meter, in front of the meter. It's been really interesting to see all those use cases living together on the same grid. And then to get to your point, it's been interesting to see the contracts SCE has signed for behind the meter with, for example, aggregators who will put together batteries across multiple customers and piece that together into a contract. That's one lens. At the same time, looking at behind the meter applications on the Edison Energy side, where, for example, I think we disclosed this a while ago now, did some work with a movie theater company where they deployed solar and storage integrated. And so that, again, is storage behind the meter for that customer. Different places, different states, different drivers. I think economics is certainly a driver for those competitive clients we've seen. We're seeing applications on the competitive side where even though storage is still relatively expensive, if a commercial or industrial customer can offset a relatively high demand charge from its local utility by shaving a good chunk of its peak using storage, that's ending up being a compelling economic value proposition for some of these customers, and we're providing that service. I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of how do we piece those learnings together, again, observing all the rules, but at a broad strategy level, being able to have those perspectives of the deployment of these technologies across both regulated and competitive landscapes. It's just frankly fascinating, and it gives us a much better platform from which to think about where else the industry might be headed.
And what are you seeing in other states?
It's state by state. Point one, that's the obvious one, right?
Yeah.
We do live in a country that, while we have some broad national energy policy, the reality is that a lot of the action in the U.S. happens down at the state level, PUC by PUC. There's probably some common themes across all the states. Again, most utilities have demand charges that they apply to commercial and industrial customers. So you see a common approach, particularly across the larger C&I customers who are in multiple states. There's a playbook there around what tools might help them to reduce their exposure to typical utility rate economics. On the other hand, individual states will have different programs or different incentives that create different opportunities. One example, last year, we, through Solcor Energy, purchased a portfolio of community solar projects in Minnesota. Turns out that a lot of states have expressed interest in developing community solar gardens. The rules are different in all the states. Minnesota's framework has been one that's been fairly attractive and constructive in terms of truly incentivizing the development of the community solar gardens. Probably one of the most attractive states in that sense. And so there you see a real difference. There's a lot more community solar garden development there than you see even in a state like California. California clearly is at the forefront of solar development and providing support for solar. Community solar, it's not quite as advanced in California yet. I think the framework is still evolving, and so you see a real big difference as compared to a state like Minnesota.
Let's turn to you more personally. California lost a great icon on Saturday. The great California chronicler and historian Kevin Starr passed away at 76 years old last Saturday. Governor Brown said of Mr. Starr that he, quote, captured the spirit of our state and brought to life the characters and personalities that made the California story. His vision, like California itself, was bigger than life. Pedro is CEO of an iconic cornerstone California company. In my view, you're now one of the characters and personalities that make the California story. Does that bring any unique sense of responsibility?
Thank you for the comments, but I think you're talking about some larger-than-life folks. That said, I do think we are an iconic company. We have been a big part of the growth of the southern part of our state. as the company went and as the economy went, the two went together. The bringing of power initially from hydro resources deep into the mountains, hundreds of miles away, the development of some of the first high voltage transmission lines in the country, with research done by Caltech in tandem with SCE, by the way. That rich history, the post-World War II boom years and the growth of the population and housing in tandem with the growth of our grid, those are all a great part of at least the Southern California story. I will admit, particularly as I was taking the CEO role, it's not lost on me that I'm part of a very, I have for many years, I've been part of a very special story. Just one part of it, but it is a special story. You also get the sense that with an institution like ours, in some ways we're stewards of the institution. It was here before us. Frankly, part of my job is to make sure that it's here well after me. Now, that's not a caretaker. Steward is very different. I suspect that our team will be guiding this long story company through some pretty amazing transformation. Mm-hmm. Transformation in our industry, transformation in our customers' expectations, transformation in the company itself, and transformation in terms of how the state uses energy writ large. There's a responsibility that our company feels and our leadership feels and I feel, not only to lead the company, but to play our role in helping lead the California economy. And I think that leadership then extends beyond California through our competitive activities as well.
Let me spin it a little deeper with another quote by Mr. Starr. At a point in his career, he described his intention as a writer to write intellectual history that showed how the California of fact and the California of imagination shape and reshape each other, that there's a factual mm-hmm. side and an imaginative side. Mm-hmm. And I think you're seeing that actually with science and technology mm-hmm. and advancement in where you sit right now as a company.
Absolutely. And I think that's something that our generation almost takes for granted now, because we've seen that story play out across multiple industries and multiple technologies. We're seeing it in our industry now. I like reminding my kids that when I was their age or younger, I remember those Dick Tracy cartoons. And the thing that I thought was the coolest about them was that little two-way wrist radio. Remember that? The TV radio. Mm-hmm. That idea that you could communicate over a little, personal-sized device. So that's the iPhone and, Apple Watch, and we have that today. So there was huge imagination that I'm sure colored, a number of people over decades, and then technology advancements that made it factual, made it real. Mm-hmm. And I think the two have to go hand in hand. Surely saw that when I was a scientist, right? Mm-hmm. And a lot of the scientific process is about imagining different outcomes, and then creating the fact base to get there.
Mr. Starr says all this, and then it's known that eventually he turned away from California as a subject, feeling that the state's great experiment and its role as an incubator of national culture mm-hmm. had come to an end. I don't think you believe that. California does still influence the nation.
Yeah, I really do. And you see that in terms of policy, you see that in terms of culture. To be frankly fair and balanced, I also think that there probably was a point in time when Starr was doing the bulk of his writing and research where California had, on a relative basis, an even more outsized influence. Mm-hmm. That said, when you think about the technology development that's emanating from the state, also a lot of the social leadership that's coming out of the state, whether you're looking at societal level policies, whether you're looking at technology development, I think across a lot of different parts of the society spectrum, the state still has an important leadership role that it's playing. And you certainly see that in the world of energy.
Let's take a break. We'll be right back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. We're back. with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International.
Over your career, you've been actively involved outside the walls of the company. In the past, you served on the board of Caltech. You're currently serving on the boards of Argonne, on the Electric Power Research Institute, or EPRI, and for EEI as well. And interestingly, I see that you're on the board of LA 2024.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that.
The Olympics.
Right.
And talk about the involvement there. What drives your broader interest beyond the walls of the company?
I'll start with our company.
Sure.
And it's probably true for a lot of my peers out there. Utility holding companies, and particularly the regulated utilities, they're part of communities, right? And there's something that happens when you're literally in every neighborhood and you have infrastructure where you can't decide that you're going to move out of state, right? Because you're not going to just pick up your poles and take them with you.
You're not a football team.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Although I think we've been the recipients of that, beneficiaries of that in LA here, with a couple of teams. Add to the fact that ours is a 130-year-old company, and it's really been part of the community developing over time. There's a sense of, hey, we're part of this. We're part of this place, and we need to show that by being out there and involved in the community. And, whether you look at our officers or executives, or you look at our employees. As a company, we contribute around $20 million a year from our investors, not from our rates. And we contribute that to charitable institutions in our communities, both here in California and also places where Edison Energy has a footprint. Our employees are investing with their own hours, and they contribute hundreds of thousands of hours a year working with their causes, charities that they have an affinity for. In my case, I feel that that's a responsibility for all of us. It's also fun. There's some great groups out there. LA 2024 is really fun. I just became involved with that when I took on the CEO role. It's the group that's sponsoring the efforts to put together what I think will be a great bid to bring the 2024 Olympics to LA.
I saw the progress. There was a memorandum of understanding in the last 2 days or something.
Right.
For,
and it prescribed
protecting LA a little bit.
Right.
But that sounded like progress.
It has, maybe taking a little tangent there, but the LA bid, I think, will be really compelling because we are a city, and by city here, really the broader community. It's not just the proper city of LA, but the broader metropolitan area. We have significant infrastructure in place already to support the Olympics without having to do a whole lot of new build. We have a new stadium in the middle of construction right now that would serve dual purpose for the Olympics. There is a strong sense of conviction that the Olympics here will be net financially positive for the community. That's a big deal. The last time LA hosted the Olympics was back in 1984. I actually learned recently that exercise actually led to the creation of something like a $100 million trust. That was the benefits that were left over after all the bills were paid, and it actually created economic value. And to this day, that is still sponsoring programs in the community and helping disadvantaged youth. And there's a real potential to add significantly to that with the 2024 Olympics. And hopefully, as the IOC looks at that bid and they see the stability of community that brings great support for the Olympics and brings a great financial proposition to it, that should make for a pretty compelling bid. So we have our fingers crossed here, and
that's exciting.
You might, you and I might be running,
carrying the torch,
not in the Olympics, but around the Olympics in a few years.
Carry the torch. Want to turn to SB 350, or if it's the greenhouse gas reductions, you are leading the way here.
We are, and there's a role we must play to help the state grapple with meeting the objectives of SB 32, the law that codified the 40% reduction target, greenhouse gases from 1990 the levels by 2030. That is a big lift for this state. We have a direct role to play in terms of our grid, but I think, as I mentioned earlier, we also have a catalyst role that we have to play, do our part to help bring together all the different forces in society that are going to have to coalesce to make this thing actually happen. I will not say that everything California is doing is being done perfectly, and any one of these things has been debated. Frankly, the company and I have had concerns about specific elements. But The overall trend is one where, particularly in the last several years, the conversation has changed. It's gotten a sharper accent on it, coalescing around the theme of the human influence on climate change and the role of greenhouse gas reduction in helping to mitigate that. If you go back 30 years, some of the first renewable programs, the focus on energy efficiency, the state has done a remarkable job. At times it's been expensive. There's been a risk in that, and there still is a risk in that, right? Because you're always optimizing and balancing the big macro objectives with the micro level realities. So, you can do something that might be the right thing for the environment in terms of a target or a mandate. It does have a cost consequence to it. If it pushes businesses out of the state, then that's not good for the population at this moment in time. There's impacts from that. So you always have to be thoughtful about managing that balance. One example of that in terms of how we engage, therefore. So SB 350, you mentioned that. That's the bill that was passed 2 years ago now to, among other things, increase the state's renewable portfolio standard requirement to 50% by 2030. Our company ended up supporting that and supporting it pretty actively, but only towards the end of the process. And only after we had sought and obtained a number of really important changes to the bill that help protect our customers' economic interests. And so I'll give you one example of this. Prior to SB 350, the utilities were the entities in the state that had to fulfill some significant part of the renewable requirements through long-term contracts. We do have some limited retail competition in the state. Those competitive retail entities did not have the same sort of long-term procurement requirement. And they were able to use short-term resources in the market. Because of all the long-term development, you could always find transactions in the market for short-term resources, which were, quite frankly, a lot cheaper than the long-term contracts. That created a real risk for our customers getting left holding a much more expensive bag and carrying more than their share of the development costs for new resources to feed the state over the long run. SB 350 included modifications that helped to bridge that gap, that it brought in long-term requirements for everybody and also allowed utilities, the investor-owned utilities, to access a greater portion of their requirement through using short-term markets. We're always in that balancing act of we support the progressive policies, but we want to do it responsibly. Another example where we have not been successful to date is the net energy metering story. And you might recall, Tom, that the state had launched net energy metering a few years back. Last year, there was a proceeding to work on NEM 2.0, so the second iteration of NEM. And without going into all the details, our basic company position was we really support solar. We think it's an important resource, and we think that distributed solar, private solar, makes a lot of sense. We believe that given the environmental benefits it brings, it should have some level of subsidy support. But we thought that the current mechanism had an excessive level of subsidy that created a real disadvantage for folks who don't have private solar on their rooftops, and they were bearing too much of that cost. We did not prevail in that proceeding, although we did get commitment from our Public Utilities Commission to revisit the topic in 2019. And I think that what the PUC said was that there wasn't enough data in the market yet about the relative benefits of solar, and they wanted a little more time to pass by to then make the argument. So that's a debate that will come back to the state. We think it's an important one because we want to do everything we can to incentivize the use of the resources. In fact, on the utility side, we've worked really hard, Tom, to do things like significantly, dramatically cut down the time that we need to evaluate and approve customer requests for interconnection of solar into our system. It used to take us over 30 days to go from a completed application to an okay to proceed. That's down to a little bit over a day now.
Oh, that's amazing.
We blew up processes internally and reformed them to, frankly, be more customer-centric in how we did that. We're doing a lot of work to support the resource, but We also want to make sure that the economic burden is shared more evenly, across society. And the reality is today we have too many of our non-solar customers, including our lower income customers, who are paying too high a share of that benefit. Mm-hmm. So that's been a lot of part of the California story has been how do you strike the balance? And we as utilities have had an important role to play in helping to educate and to moderate the outcomes.
Let's take a 15-second timeout. We'll be right back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. We're back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International.
So we now have SB 32, again, 40% reduction from 1990 levels by 2030 across the entire economy. A little bit of context is helpful in describing just how big a task that is. Mm-hmm. I think I shared this with our investors in my last earnings call. Between 1990 and 2014, the state's population grew by 30%. So the economy grew along with it. Greenhouse gas emissions statewide went up by only 3%. That's remarkable. I mean, that's a big success story for the state. Mm-hmm. That's the impact of the early waves of renewables. That's the impact of the focus on energy efficiency that's kept per capita energy consumption flat to declining. That's big success in terms of the focus on passenger vehicle mileage and fuel efficiency. So big win for the state. So that was the 2014. Now we're here in 2017, sitting with that slight increase over time. So that means that 40% reduction is actually more like a 42% reduction from current levels.
I see.
That we now need to achieve 13 years from now. And I'm assuming that the economy will continue to grow and the population will continue to grow. And so that's a big task. It was a huge accomplishment to keep greenhouse gases flat over 2.5 decades. It's going to be a much bigger challenge to have them decreased by almost half. Mm-hmm. When you take a look at the stack of greenhouse gas emissions for the state, in part because there's been so much focus on the electric segment of the economy, electric power generation only accounts for about 20% of California greenhouse gas emissions. I think it's 2014 data.
Okay.
In contrast, transportation is about 36% of statewide greenhouse gas emissions. Industrial manufacturing processes are, I think, around another 20%, and there's another, call it 20-ish%, other. So that means that even if you could magically wave away all remaining greenhouse gas emissions from the electric sector, which will be tough to do because we still need, at least some portion of gas-fired resources to serve as the, balancing tool. But even if you did away with all electric power emissions, that would only be a 20% reduction in greenhouse gases for the state, mm-hmm. not accounting for continued, population growth. That means that by definition, a significant portion of the changes over the next 13 years are going to have to come from sectors in addition to, not just from the electric power sector.
Right.
And transportation with its 36%, exposure is a logical place, but really, economy-wide, any place where putting a fossil fuel in a combustion chamber and lighting the match is going to be a candidate ripe for conversion to an alternate technology. And again, over the course of the next decade, 13 years, most of those conversions are going to rely on electric sources, mm-hmm. and we'll use the grid. So that's the task ahead, right? Our role in that is really twofold, as I said earlier. We need to make sure that our grid can handle what's coming, and that our grid can handle it while also meeting the state's objective of 50% renewables, and while also acknowledging that a lot of the future sources of energy, they won't all be central power stations. There'll be a lot more distributed resources as customers make choices to deploy their own technologies. So, big task for us. I feel very confident about our ability to manage that. We filed a rate case recently covering 2018 to 2020 that continues our reinvestment in the grid. It also has amounts in there for modernizing the grid and making it better able to manage distributed energy resources growing on our system. But as I said earlier, the other role that we have is how do we help the rest of society, the rest of the economy, grapple with that conversion that they're going to make. And then there'll be a number of projects that are going to require cross-economy collaboration.
We'll be right back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. We're back with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International.
One obvious example to us anyway. We have two major ports in Southern California. One of them is in our service territory, the Port of Long Beach. The other one is adjacent, the Port of LA. Port of Long Beach has been a real leader in demonstrating electrification technologies. They have a relatively new terminal, their Middle Harbor Island, that's all electric. Has within the fence of the port, it has automated driverless vehicles that are battery operated. So great from a greenhouse gas emissions perspective, great from an efficiency perspective as well, labor efficiency. But when you think about those ports, it's not just the operations at the ports, it's the whole transportation network that comes out of those ports and goes out, say, within a 50-mile radius. It's multi-mode transport. Some of it is rail, some of it is truck. A lot of it goes to warehouses at the outskirts of the metropolitan area. There is a lot of fossil fuel use and the resulting emissions out of that whole system. And oh, by the way, that a lot of it travels over the 710 freeway. For those folks who've been to Southern California, they might remember it. It's one of the older freeways and tends to be pretty busy with traffic with a lot of trucks on it because all those trucks are either coming or going, to the ports. Imagine a world where sometime in the next 13 years, we, California, not just we, SCE, it's going to take a lot of folks who work on this together, we repurpose some of those lanes, and we also have transmission rights of way along parts of that. Imagine taking all of those rights of way, all that land, and reconfiguring the modes of transportation that use it, having electric forms of transportation, whether it be electric trucks or whether it be conveyance systems or what have you. Significant impact in terms of reducing greenhouse gases, but also significant impact in reducing all the other criteria pollutants along the way. And that 710 route goes through a number of disadvantaged communities. So you have an immediate set of health benefits, beneficial impact for those communities, in addition to the broader, helping meet the broader objective of greenhouse gas reduction. To me, that's one example, though, of can you imagine the kind of cross-economy and cross-government collaborations required?
Yes.
Certainly, we need to be a part of it. The various transit companies, whether rail, trucking companies, the Department of Motor Vehicles, the Transportation Authority, local authorities, the Air Resources Board, the Public Utilities Commission,
the federal government. It's an interstate highway.
It is. That's an interstate highway. I'm kind of focused on the within the state piece, but you're right. It's an interstate, so maybe some federal pieces might also go through some federal, portions. It's going to take a really big village to get these things going, and we have 13 years to do it.
It's not much time.
And we got to do enough of them. We have to do enough of them to not just continue holding our greenhouse gas emissions flat like we've done for the last 2.5 decades, but to drop them by almost half in the next dozen plus years.
Maybe it's an idealistic question, or maybe it's a question seeking an idealistic answer, but how do you envision a way of cooperating with these other sectors, whether it be transportation, industry, ports?
I want our company to be seen as a thought leader who's willing to engage and have the debate, but also have a sense of urgency because the state needs it. We have the legislative foundation. We have SB 32. It's very clear. It's a law that was really firmly supported by the population of the state. You look at polls from folks like the Public Policy Institute of California, they show that there is very deep support for this across the electorate. I think folks have to come together and recognize that no one entity can solve this problem. As Edison International, we have, I think, this sense of responsibility to, first of all, educate ourselves and have a point of view on what we think may be needed, recognizing we won't get it all right, but I want to have a starting point of a good analytically based point of view on the kinds of initiatives that will be needed across the economy. I want us engaging with multiple parties out there. I have that point of view in a very transparent way. And then, frankly, we just got to roll up our sleeves with folks who will be natural partners and maybe with folks who may not be so natural partners. Just as we're having to change how we operate as a utility in some pretty dramatic ways, I think it would be significant changes coming to a number of other industries. If the state is serious about meeting its objectives by 2030, there's no one initiative, no one big program that's going to get you 40% reduction. It really has to be a multitude of programs economy-wide. Even in the case of transportation electrification, our filing is going to have a number of different proposals. Just because there's, as you do the whole rack and stack of emissions, they don't all come from one kind of vehicle or one kind of use. It's just literally spread out across the economy. It's a big job, Tom.
It's a big job.
We'll be right back for the conclusion of our discussion with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. We're back for the conclusion of our discussion with CEO Pedro Pizarro, Edison International.
We're at the end of our time. I'll just finish with an interesting tie-in, and I don't know if it ties into SCE or not, but the claim was made that it's going to be the first energy-positive solar-powered games ever. How does that relate to you all?
Oh, absolutely. It does, both to SCE and to Edison Energy. And we're engaged as Edison International with the organizers. I mean, what a great opportunity to highlight the new technologies that are reshaping the energy industry and to actually put them to work. Right? And so the objective here is to have frankly, the cleanest Olympics in history by widespread use of technologies like solar and storage, electric vehicles. So bringing all of this, to bear to support the Olympics, coincident with where California will be by that point, right? So 2024 is pretty much, actually a little bit more than halfway between today and 2030. The date by which we will have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by 40%. And so we better be well on the way to significantly changing what the economy looks like and what the greenhouse gas intensity of the economy looks like. I am convinced, I don't see any way that the state can get there unless many parts of the economy adopt electric technologies, shift from using fossil fuels to using the grid as a power source. In that context, I would expect this Olympics to have significant use of solar resources, significant use of efficient lighting, a significant support from a modernized grid, right, that can accommodate more of these distributed resources. Electric transportation is going to be a big part of it. And when you think about the mass transit requirements to move not only the Olympic competitors, but the viewing public around this city, having an electric fleet that not only has a better greenhouse gas footprint, but also that is much better in terms of other criteria pollutants, that will require significant infrastructure investment, significant changes in retooling across multiple sectors of the economy. And if the state's going to be successful by 2030, which it's very committed to do, we better be well on the way towards that in 2024, and so that coincides nicely with bringing those technologies to bear, for the Olympics. So, really excited to see how all these things come together. And 2024 gives the state a really good tool. It's always good to have an interim milestone on the way to a big milestone. So 2030 is a really big milestone. 2024 will be an important interim milestone in terms of adoption of these technologies.
Yeah, that's exciting. The pressure, the uplift you'd get from the Olympic showcase would be helpful in speeding the way there. What's the due date on the submittal and the award of
So if I recall correctly, the submittal is happening this spring, and then the final selection will be in September in Lima, Peru.
September 2017.
2017. We'll get the good news within this year.
That's excellent. Thank you, Pedro,
Thanks,
for
Tom.
hosting me.
Yeah,
we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, it's fun.
That concludes episode 9 and our conversation with Pedro Pizarro, CEO of Edison International. California has been a success in advancing renewables. According to a U.S. Energy Information Administration article in February 2016, California was reported to have nearly half of the nation's solar electricity generating capacity. Another Energy Information Administration report in September of 2016 said non-hydro renewables, including solar, wind, geothermal, and biomass, represented 26% of generation capacity in California in June of 2016. It will be fascinating to watch the California story unfold. As we said in the beginning, California legislation presents to Edison a stage set for leading beyond the boundaries of the corporation. This includes a plot thickened by the stark disparity between California and federal climate and renewable energy policy. But there are no scripts for this story. The action will be carried by a talented troupe of improvisational actors. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Pedro Pizarro. We'll be back in about 1 month with episode 10. The Leadership Lyceum, a CEO's virtual mentor, has been a production of the Leadership Lyceum, LLC, copyright 2016, all rights reserved. Come back and listen. It's lonely at the top.